Welcome to the Album Anniversary Podcast. Today's show is about Birds in Cages by Deas Vale. It was released January 26th, 2010, so it is celebrating a 15-year anniversary. I'm your host, Caleb, or Caleb the Spy on Twitter and Instagram, and every day on social media, I post about what I call album anniversaries. So, on the Album Anniversary Podcast, we take a look at a classic album on the anniversary of its release date. This show is a chance to talk about why we love an album, why an album is important to us, why a certain album is worth celebrating. Albums on the show often focus on alternative rock, punk, and my strange obsession with ska. In the 90s, I was super into the Christian music scene, so that comes up often on the show. Today, I'm joined by John to talk about Birds in Cages by Deas Vale. I'm going to struggle with that all show. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you could join me. You've always got some great insights on Twitter, and I'm still calling it Twitter because it's who I am.
Too.
But I always am excited to see your responses when I post about albums and some great stuff. Just commentary on music. So I was really excited to have you on the show. I know we tried to connect earlier. It was late last year to get something. Just timing didn't work out. So I'm glad we were able to make it happen and have you join the show.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad. Yeah, me too. I'm glad it finally worked out. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. So usually on the show, I do, kind of go through somebody's history of kind of how they got into music. But you did that on Church Jams Now. You joined them for, I'm gonna forget it's Wolves in the title.
That's Attack of the Wolf King by Hasty.
There you go. So you kind of went through that there. So I would strongly recommend, if you haven't listened to that episode, they should go check that out. They can hear your whole story about kind of how you got into music. So I was actually going to ask, because you spent a couple years in a band, and you weren't originally in that band. You kind of joined later. Is that true, or were you original?
Correct. So I joined about a year after they originally formed. Okay. The band we're talking about is Atlas, out of North Carolina. They formed in 2010, and then about a year later, their singer Seth, who I was friends with and went to college with, reached out to me and asked if music was still something that I was wanting to do, and had mentioned that they needed a bass player. So I was living in Charlotte area at the time, and it was kind of a say less. And a month or two later, I was out in Raleigh, and was in the band for about 3 years.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Was that a tricky transition? Like, they've got this kind of established thing going on, or because you at least were connected with a couple of them that you were kind of able to slide in pretty easily?
I think, because Seth and I played in a band in college.
Okay.
And what actually happened was their original drummer left. He was a youth pastor, and he was just about to get married.
Yep.
And he was like, I can't really
Same
do
old
this.
story. Same old story.
So he kind of said, I can't really commit to this right now, and I don't want to keep you guys from, pushing forward. So their original bass player at the time was actually a drummer, but he learned to play bass to be in the band. And so when Adam stepped away, Chris switched over to drums, and then I jumped in on bass.
Nice. And then you said about 3 years with the band. Did you get to record an album during that time?
So we recorded 2 albums and an EP.
Wow.
when I was during my time, and started writing for the 3rd album, full length.
Okay.
Pretty much had almost all the writing done for the full length, and then I left the end of 2013.
Okay.
And that was the album that we put out on Face Down Records.
Okay.
Into the Sea. But they actually had me come back and track my parts on the single Sirens. And then my official final show with the band actually was the album release show for that record, which didn't come out until June of 2015.
Okay.
So it's pretty crazy to look back and see a lot of those songs were being written as early as 2000, the end of 2011. I think we had already been
Wow.
writing some of those songs. That album actually ended up getting shelved for a while, for a time, while we did our album Gospel Hymns Volume 2.
Yes.
We had been approached by a family from the church that most of us attended at the time, with this opportunity to record gospel hymns, and have the proceeds for that album go to funding a school and an orphanage in Uganda.
Awesome.
And so we actually didn't make any money off that album.
Hmm.
We put any money we got from it, we sent right over to, it's called 7 Billion Reasons.
Okay.
They're still a nonprofit that's still going strong, and they still invite me to go to Uganda with them every now and then. And I'm just like, oh man, I would love to. It would be so cool to be able to go and see something that we were a part of, at least just helping build a school. I mean, that's just incredible to have
Yeah.
the opportunity to do that. And Seth, our lead singer, had been writing some original worship songs that
Hmm.
we'd been doing at the church with the high school students and the college students, and then we redid some other old hymns,
Yeah.
kind of in our style, and that's something that we've kind of been doing in that setting as well. So, yeah, so we ended up putting Into the Sea on the shelf, and I think, I I absolutely believe in the sovereignty of God, and that's one of those things where I think God knew exactly what was going on,
Hmm.
and the timing just worked out perfectly that once we were kind of done with the album cycle for gospel hymns, getting ready for Into the Sea, I stepped away.
Hmm.
They started talking to some small labels, talked to one label that some other bands in the scene have been a part of, and that ended up not working out.
Hmm.
And then during the time when they were really getting into the early recording of Into the Sea, they had put out, I think, 4 songs,
Okay.
or like early rough mixes, on Noise Trade, which,
I
are you
remember Noise
familiar with?
Trade.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay. I was
I
gonna
got a
say,
lot of stuff from Noise Trade, to be honest.
I felt like you would be familiar with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, they had put 4 rough mixes of songs up on Noise Trade early in 2014,
Okay.
as they were working on the album. And Face on Records, I was on Twitter and said,
Hmm.
hey, what are some unsigned bands you guys are listening to? And I said, hey, my old band is gearing up to put out a new album. The whole thing is basically already done. Here's 4 songs that are going to be on it.
Wow.
One of those songs actually ended up not making it because it would have been like the third 7+ minute long song. um, so the label was like, "Hey, if you guys want to do vinyl, we're gonna have to cut something
Yeah.
somewhere." So we're like, "All right, we'll cut that one." But you can still find that. I think there's somebody posted that version of that song on
Hmm.
YouTube somewhere. But yeah, so Jason Dunn of Face Down, when he reached out to the band, the other guys, they're like, "How did you hear about us?" And he's like, "Somebody on Twitter said, hey, you should check out this band Atlas. They have these songs." And so they're like, I think that was Amos. Like,
Yeah.
so it was just cool to kind of come back almost full circle there. And, I was, I don't know. It's interesting being in a band, and you never want to kind of feel like, I don't know. In some sense, there's this feeling of like you don't really want to be a fan of your own band, but at the same time, why would you not?
Yeah.
And so I always believed in Atlas and saw the potential that we had, and knew the potential that the rest of the guys, especially as musicians and songwriters, had. And so to be able to at least experience a small part of that, obviously I missed out on a lot of the shows that they played. They
Hmm.
played over in Christmas Rock Night in Germany, and
Hmm.
2 years in a row, and some other things like that I kind of missed out on. But yeah, to at least be, and I actually ended up was in the music video for Sirens as well, because
Hmm.
they filmed that the week that I was down there for the album release show. And they're like, hey, do you want to be in the video? We might as well have someone pretending to play bass as opposed to not. And I was like, sure. So, but yeah, it was just really cool. And my then girlfriend, who's now my wife, ended up coming down as well. And
Hmm.
So she got to see. We didn't know each other when I was in the band, and so yeah,
Oh,
it
that's
was just
cool.
a really cool way to kind of end that chapter of my life, and something that I look back on with a lot of gratefulness. And
Yeah.
it was a dream of mine to do to be in a band, and
Yeah.
yeah, I got to do it.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. I mean, just like that experience. I mean, I think it's one of those things that I'll never experience because I'm way too old and I don't have any talent. Those things are really working against against my ability to join a band and create something like that. But I mean, that's pretty cool. And I like that balance of like you want to be a fan of there's a difference between being a fan of your band and being like arrogant about like we're the best thing ever. Like there's a
Mhm.
difference there. There's a nice balance to be had. I think it's fun when, bands you can tell they like what they're doing and they like what they're
Yeah,
producing. There's something of value in that of like, yeah, no, we're a fan of this too, and that's okay, even if it's sillier music or less more serious stuff. So I think that's
absolutely.
an appropriate stance to have that I'm a fan of my own band. So
Hmm.
awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. That was really cool. I had kind of wondered about some of that because, again, this is another. We'll get into it with this record that we're going to cover. Like, Atlas was something new to me. Eric McClanahan introduced me to it, and went back
Hmm.
and found a bunch of stuff on streaming, and was like, oh, I should check this out. And so it was something interesting to check out. So same thing. I would encourage people to go check it out. It's a lot of it's on streaming. I think some of the gospel hymn stuff are a little harder to find. I had to look for one of them. I think one of them you can only purchase from Amazon, but there a lot of the other stuff is available on streaming. So definitely
Hmm.
worth checking out.
It's making perfect sense why I'm putting this one off. I'm gonna take that second chance before the
We're covering Birds and Cages by, and I'm gonna say it wrong because I know I am, but I listened to an interview to make sure I say the band name right, but I'm gonna mess it up. Deus Vale, I
Yeah,
think is how you say
nailed
it.
it.
All right, good job, me. Pronunciation not my strength. If you're at all this familiar with the show, so this was released. Now I realized this. It's on my calendar on January 26th, 2010. So that's when this episode will come out. 15-year anniversary. Technically, that is the physical release of this. This was actually released digitally back in October of 2009. So it has two kind of release dates, and which is interesting because this was released on Mono Stereo, and that's not like an independent label. Like that's a pretty well funded label. So it's an interesting
Hmm.
strategy to have this one released digitally 3 months, 4 months, 3 months. I'm good with math. 3 months before the actual release of the album. So it's
Hmm.
an interesting dynamic going on.
Yeah, and I didn't even remember that. Like
Yeah.
I had no recollection of that. The only thought that I had was maybe they thought that it would be cool to do kind of like a pre-release
Yeah.
and let people, hey, the album's out, you can go listen to it. Physical copies are available January 26th. But I have no memory of that. I bought it. I think I actually pre-ordered it, the CD from deepdiscount.com, which,
Bunch of callbacks here. Noise Trade,
oh my
deep
goodness,
discount.
yeah, which is apparently still around because I still get emails from them sometimes. But I'm almost positive I pre-ordered it from there. And yeah, that was, but yeah, I didn't know
Yeah.
about the digital. That's super interesting.
Yeah, there's another album recently. It was one of the Starflyer 59s that has like two release dates because I think one of it was like a Kickstarter thing. So I think some people got it earlier
Mm-hmm.
and then so I do know what happens, but this is just an interesting strategy because I couldn't find any rhyme or reason to it. It's just
Yeah.
you can see that there's two release dates out there. So yeah.
Hmm.
And then speaking of Mono Stereo, this was their first album, I believe, on Mono Stereo, which is
Yeah.
a spin-off of Goatee, if people aren't
Hmm.
familiar. And what's interesting is that actually got retired at some point. Like they quit doing albums for Mono Stereo. And then in 2009, it kind of resurfaced. It was resurrected. And members of Reliant K actually started overseeing it. So and Matt Thiessen is on this album, and then Matthew Hoops, he produces their next album. So, they got involved with this band, and with Mono Stereo. So that's kind of cool that, the label had died, and then kind of middle of 2009, it gets resurrected. And this is one of those, first releases in the first 6 months of it coming back to life. This was their fifth release, the band's fifth release, second or third full-length album. There's a couple of EPs. They have a lot of releases, and there are a number of EPs. So I know it's their fifth release, and it's their second or third full-length album. I saw a couple. Wikipedia says second, but then I was looking at something, and it looked like maybe it was its third. But so I'm going with second or third, and I'm just going to leave it at that. And then this was produced by the great Mark Lee Townsend, and I believe he had worked with them before, so this was not a first time working with them. But he's probably most famous for his connection with DC Talk, Reliant K, and I'm going to throw out Church Jams Now. I think just right around this time, they just released another interview with Mark Lee Townsend. So you should totally go check out that episode as well.
And Deus Vale does come up briefly in that interview.
Oh, does it? Okay, I haven't gotten to it yet. So
Kylan brought them up. He brings them up very briefly.
Well, there you go. There's another plug for their show. I'll have to go make sure I get that listened to as well. I will say one of the things that I find really interesting about this album is the album art. I don't know who this guy is or girl. It could be. I guess it's Wilmer. Here we go. Caleb pronouncing things. Merlio. I have no idea how to say it, but it's an interesting piece of art. I don't know. Obviously the album's called Bird in Cages, and it's a bird sitting on top of a cage. It's a pretty funny looking bird, but I enjoy the album art. I think it's fairly striking and definitely stands out.
Do you have a copy of the CD?
I do not.
Okay. So there's some additional.
There's additional stuff in there. Okay.
So yeah, each member of the band with a different bird. I
Funny.
completely forgot about that. I went and found this like just before jumping on the call.
Pulled out the CD. I love it.
And I completely forgotten about the additional artwork with each member of the band. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean,
fun.
I love a good physical media. I don't have this one partially because I'm just not as familiar, but that is a really cool little booklet.
Yeah, I'm hoping it'd be nice if they did the vinyl treatment for the 15th anniversary.
Yeah, well, 2010 is kind of the nomadic land of like, do we do everything digital? And maybe that's part of the double release, but you get a lot of releases around this time that are just CDs because the vinyl hasn't quite taken off for a lot of bands. So I will say I have zero sales data for this. Sometimes I can find stuff, nothing, absolutely nothing. So I have no idea how this sold. I have nothing to back that up. I see a lot of very positive reviews from the time, and most reviews seem to mention that this, if it's not perfect, it's a huge jump forward for the band. That seemed to be the overarching theme of almost every review. So I don't know, you got this when it came out. Did you kind of connect with that as well?
Yeah, I did. I think I really got on with them with the previous release, which was the Bright Lights EP.
Okay.
Which was good. I really liked that a lot. And that's kind of what hooked me into paying that much more attention for when this album was released. Although obviously I missed something if it was released early digitally. Oops. And then I did go back and listen to what I thought was their first album. I don't know. Maybe they had an independent album before. Like
I think that might be what it is.
But all the houses look the same, which I enjoyed, and I think it was a great. Well, we'll just call it a label debut at least, if not. And I know a lot of people really hold that album in high esteem, but I think they took where they started with that. And began to build with Bright Lights, and then I think Birds in Cages is kind of maybe I think it's kind of the best version of what they were really going for. Yeah, I don't know. It's not as, I felt like all the houses look the same. Had a lot of really slow, kind of more mid-tempo songs, and I think there's like 14 tracks on it. So it's a little bit longer of an album. Not that I'm one to talk about being in a band with a long album, but yeah, again, a lot of more mid-tempo. Not so it didn't feel like it really moved along as far as the pacing goes. All that quickly. But I did listen to it this week, and I liked it a lot more than I remembered.
Interesting.
So, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I do. I agree with that. I think the guitars in particular really were stepped up. I think they had a different guitarist,
Hmm.
at least between the albums. I'm not sure what the lineup was on the Bright Lights EP, but Andy, the guitarist on Birds and Cages, I think he really added a lot to the sound that they were really going for on this record. Mark Townsend mentioned their other guitarist, and I think he was just talking about he was on at least All the Houses Look the Same.
Yeah. Well, they have a lot of, I mean, again, and this is just me dinking around on Wikipedia. They do have a lot of former members.
Hmm.
So it looks like there was a number of lineup shifts. Although I think technically, because they're broken up, everybody gets
Yeah,
thrown into that category as well. So
true.
awesome. Well, those are my facts. Some bands, some albums you can go on for hours without it. Some you can't. Some there's a little more limited. So with that out of the way, I think we'll jump in and we'll tackle some of our questions.
To chase the night away as we wait for daylight to break. What is life kept to ourselves? Careful words jump off. It's a book upon the shelf. The story never told.
First question that we always start with, and you kind of got into this a little bit, but how did you first discover this album, and how did you first discover this band?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure my first introduction to Deus Vale was the Bright Lights EP.
Okay.
My buddy Jeff, who actually played in that band with Seth from Atlas and I in college.
Okay.
He and I used to always share music all the time. Still to this day, we do.
Hmm.
He's still one of my best friends, and but he said, "Dude, you got to check out this EP by Deus Vale, Bright
Yeah.
Lights," and so I did, and I was like, "Okay, cool, this is great," and I was like, there's not enough though." A five song EP,
Yeah.
six if you count the acoustic version of Bright Lights, and but I was eager for more, and yeah, eventually found out that they were putting out a new album, and in 2010 that I was aware of.
Right. Pre-ordered it. I mean, so
Again,
clearly you knew it was coming.
right. So yeah, I got the album, and instantly it was just
Hmm.
I listened to this record nonstop in 2010.
Okay.
And I actually saw them in 2010. Yeah, it would have had to have been 2010.
Okay.
They actually were on Copeland's farewell tour, quote
Okay.
unquote.
Until they came back.
Yeah, but that was an incredible lineup,
Yeah.
honestly. So it was Deus Vale opened, then Person L, which was the lead singer of the Starting Line, one of his side projects, but
Hmm.
not pop punk at all, really, but really, really cool. I don't even know what I would call it, but just really interesting stuff. It was really
Yeah.
good. And then the band goes by I Can Make a Mess now. At the time, it was I Can Make a Mess Like Nobody's Business, which was another side project from another band, the Early November, the
Okay.
lead singer of the Early November, Ace Enders, his side project band. And the album they were touring on was great as well. And then Copeland. I mean, it was an incredible lineup, and
Yeah.
Deus Vale was so good live. Like anytime a guy has that kind of a voice,
Yeah.
I'm always a little skeptical on how it's
For
going to
sure.
sound live. Because you don't know how much of it is really doctored in the studio
Yep.
and how much they can actually do that in person.
Yeah.
But Wes, I mean, he sounded really good. I was very impressed. And then I actually ended up seeing them. I don't remember if it was 2010. I think it was. I think it was still the same year.
Hmm.
In the fall, they were on tour with Reliant K, who
Okay.
did kind of like an acoustic Christmassy kind of tour. And so it was actually just Wes and Andy just playing
Hmm.
acoustic.
Okay.
But they sounded great. And I actually talked to them a little bit, both of them a little bit after their set, and they had mentioned that they were working on a new album with Matt Hoops from
Okay.
Reliant K, and I only ever got to see them those two times, but
Really?
yeah, they were great live band. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
that's
awesome.
kind of my history with the band.
Cool. Mine's much more boring. We were talking before we started. it was CCM Twitter. This was one of the things when I started accumulating a calendar. I threw out suggestions. I kind of started going to search for other things outside of my wheelhouse. And this was one. I got this off of Eric McClanahan's favorite 250 albums list. I don't know the number, but it falls somewhere on there. So obviously he's got some affection for this album as well. Yeah, this is another CCM Twitter. Shout out CCM Twitter for showing me another thing. So 2009, 2010, my focus just is elsewhere. I'm really digging into hip hop at the time and like a lot of old hymns. That's kind of the big two things that I'm listening to at the time. So that's where all of my attention was musically, stuff I had been listening to too. And I'll be honest, I missed a lot of this scene. This is going to be my second show here in a row of kind of this. Oh, the other one is not emo pop, but that's kind of how I refer to this as kind of an emo pop sound. I missed this entire scene. This is new to me. I'm excited for the chance to dig into it, but yeah, totally new to me. I listened to it a lot this week in preparation for this show, but it's definitely a different experience. I have zero nostalgia, so mine is just purely how I think about it right now. But yeah, my story is a little more boring.
At the same time, I think that gives you maybe a little bit more weight to your opinion as well, because
I wouldn't put any weight behind my opinion.
Well, but you don't have that nostalgia,
right?
And sometimes it's hard to tell how much of something that you loved, 15 years ago, how much of it is, weighed down by nostalgia, and how much of it is this really is a great piece of art. You know what I mean?
No, I'm pretty willing to admit my nostalgia. Like, I will say it, like the first 5 Iron Frenzy record makes it in my top 10 purely for what it means to me. It's kind of irrelevant of if it's good or bad at this point, because it's such a catalyst for so much of my musical enjoyment after that album. I cannot divorce myself from nostalgia on that one. There's no possible way I can do it. I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to say this is why I like it. It's the nostalgia, even though I do genuinely still like it. So yeah, but my introduction to this is much more recent. I think I listened to it not a bunch, but a couple times last year when it came up on the calendar. So this wasn't my first time listening to them. But it was 2022, 2023 before I'd ever checked this out. So
thanks.
Let's go on to our next question then. So what do you love about this album?
Oh man.
This one can go long sometimes.
So it's like I said, when it first came out, I mean, sometimes when you're anticipating the release of an album, especially back in this time before streaming was as big as it is now, I think, because Spotify was 2009 or 2010.
I don't know. I was buying on iTunes a lot.
Yeah.
I had transitioned to digital at this time.
So right around here, I mean, this is probably a little early, maybe ahead of Spotify, at least being widely used.
Yeah.
I don't think I was on Spotify at this point. So, bands were not necessarily releasing, especially not like they do today, 4 or 5 singles before the album drops.
Yeah.
I think Excuses was the lead single.
Interesting.
And maybe the only song they put out before the album released. I don't know. But yeah, you just never knew exactly what to expect until you put the CD in your car, in your room, whatever. And I'd loved to sit down with the CD, open the liner notes, read the lyrics along with it. And that was just that's an experience that you don't really have anymore. I mean, I guess I could if I just didn't listen to all the singles that a band puts out, but that's like, it's too hard for me to do.
Yeah, it's tough.
I'm too impatient now. Yeah, I mean, I just listened to this album nonstop. It did not leave my car CD player for weeks, months, maybe.
Yeah, I love that.
And the melodies are so catchy. the guitar parts are so interesting and well written,
Hmm.
and then how the piano interacts with all of that, and then Wes and Laura's voices sound so good together. I mean, it's like that sound you said. Like I have no problem with calling that kind of emo pop. I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty close to that vein of especially Copeland. So it makes so much
Yes.
sense that they were on that farewell
Yep.
tour. But also bands which I think they had broken up at that point. But it's like Something Corporate,
Hmm.
Jack's Mannequin, that piano driven,
Yep.
yeah, like emo pop. I don't think anybody's really going to take too much issue with that because
Right.
I don't know what else you would call it. But yeah, it's that it's very much in that lane, and they did it very well.
Yep.
And yeah, it's just so many kind of earworms that just kind of get stuck in your head,
Yep.
and then lyrically as well. There's a lot of depth there. There's a lot of stuff that I don't fully understand with like the metaphors and stuff,
Yeah.
but
It's
there's
very
enough there.
poetic. Like there's
Yes.
a lot of poetry in the lyrics, which
Hmm.
I think it fits really well with the music. Like some styles of music that's not always going to work, but it's a great compliment here. The lyrics are clearly thoughtful, and there's themes you can totally pick on themes. Some of the things that I cheated a little and kind of looked up some of them because again you don't have a ton of time to go. But the idea of freedom and faith. I mean, Cajun Birds clearly is going on that dynamic, and kind of some personal struggles, other things that I've heard that come up. But I do really enjoy. I think the poetic lyrics are really work with this musical style. It's a really good balance that they
Hmm.
nail on this, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
I also think the music, I like how it's it's both intricate and melodic. I really like how some of the things there yet it has this full feeling. Like there's a lot of parts of it that feel very full, especially with all when the vocals come in. So I think it's musically, I think it really does work. There's a couple guitar moments that do throw me off. One
Mm.
of them's on, I think I have it called out somewhere else, but like it's on Sunlight. There's a guitar part, like right at the guitar part at the intro is a little throws me off a little, even though I really like the song. And then there's a couple
Mm.
moments in Cages that throw me off, but otherwise, I also think it's just such a really great cohesive sound. Like the album
Hmm.
works as a unit, and that is my favorite thing about an album when it works together as a cohesive work. And this really feels like they again, that's another thing they nailed. This just feels cohesive, and it
Hmm.
feels like it's not, you can tell there's individual songs, but it feels like it
Yeah.
it fits together as a whole, which I love.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's I'm going to borrow a phrase from our Church Jams Now buddies, and there's a lot of sweet bass, as Colin would say.
Yes.
And as a bass player, that's something that just hooked me in as well.
Yeah.
So I'd hear that and be like, "Oh, dude, that's so good."
Yeah.
Just so satisfying.
Yeah. It is one of those things where like musically I think there's a lot going on too. Like,
Hmm.
but it seems fairly managed. And
Hmm.
again, it all really works. Like you mentioned earlier, Wes's kind of vocals, and like they are extreme in some way. I mean, like there's a lot of falsetto, but then there's also
Yeah.
there's some really good vocal delivery. And again, I think that all works with the whole package works together. I think it is just a nice balance. And again, I haven't gone back and listened to their other ones, so I don't know if those are some of those things that made people feel like, oh, this is really this step forward. And maybe it's the pace. I do like the pace of it.
Hmm.
If they slowed down about half of these songs and they were a little more slower, I don't think they would work as well. I think the pace
Yeah.
of this, it makes it feel a little, not a little, this is such a strange phrase, it makes it feel epic. Like a lot of these songs feel epic in the way they build and the pace they go. So I think it also is a interesting dynamic. You don't get a lot of piano stuff that's got a little more, it's not fast, but it's got a little more pace to it, and enough to keep it interesting.
There's good energy,
Yeah.
you know.
Yep.
Of course there's a couple slower songs. You've got Tell Me, which is basically an intro for Dance in Perfect Time.
Yep.
And then The Leaper and Atlantis are a little on the slower side.
Yep.
Great Physician is kind of more mid tempo, but it's got, yeah, again, it's got good energy. It
Yep.
doesn't feel like, oh man, they just really slammed on the brakes here.
Yep.
So yeah, like you said, there's a lot going on, but they did a great job of not making it too busy.
Yep. Yeah.
You know, it could have been the kind of thing where, oh man, this is really cool, but oh wait, this piano part over here is kind of distracting from what's going on in the whole song. Or
Yeah.
there's not really any moments like that where you're like, I don't know, maybe you had a couple with the guitar parts
Yeah.
on a couple of
There's a
songs,
couple,
but
but overall, it
mhm,
works. Yeah.
yeah,
Also, the Matt Thiessen feature is pretty fun,
yes,
in my
yes,
opinion.
so
Like
good.
he really fits with it. Like
Hmm.
I think I listened to it and I was like, oh, Matt Thiessen's on this, and like you almost kind of had to figure out where he is, and then once you hear it, you're like, oh, that's him.
Hmm.
But the way his vocals, because I think he kind of transitions to more of a falsetto,
Yes.
and it works. It's like he's kind of matching their energy,
Hmm.
and it's a lovely little feature in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, great, exactly. You nailed it. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, when I first got the album, I remember listening to it. Oh, Matt Thiessen's on this song, and yeah, trying to pick out where he was. I'm like, okay, I can hear him on the bridge. It's not that there are ever bad intentions. And then he goes to the falsetto part. I'm like, wait, is that Wes?
Yeah,
And then it took a couple listens for me. Like, oh no, that's actually Matt Thiessen
yeah,
doing that falsetto, because he doesn't do that often, if at
no,
all, with Reliant K. At least not
yeah,
in that same kind of way. So yeah, he it was cool that he came in and really kind of, yeah, like you said, he tried to match
yeah.
kind of what they do.
Yep. And I think Mark Lee Townsend deserves a shout out on this album.
Oh
I think
yeah.
it's really well produced. It
Hmm.
feels like to me that they really took advantage of the major label, and maybe had a little more money, and I think they spent it well because it's
Hmm.
a really well produced album in my opinion.
Yeah. Yep.
One of my hangups about these some of these albums at this time is the wall of sound is overwhelming. Like
Hmm.
I don't love the wall of sound. I like a little more. I don't know. I just don't love it, and I don't feel like the wall of sound on. You don't get that on this, which is I think is I appreciate.
Yeah.
As much time I give anything to make it better, baby. This is something I can't change. Oh, this silence could go on forever. Am I walking with you in your dreams?
So for you, this is gonna be a more for you probably. But why is this album something that's important to you? Because we're talking about it 15 years later. Is it something that's important to you, or is it at the very least? Why are the reasons that this holds up so well?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because when you mentioned that this was one of the albums coming up, I've always had a very soft spot for this album,
Yeah.
and a lot of it is nostalgia. So in 2009, March of 2009, I moved down to North Carolina from Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
where I'm originally from. And I lived in the Charlotte area for about 2 years,
Okay.
from 2009 to 2011. That's when I moved and joined Atlas. But so for those 2 years, especially that second year there, it was kind of a tough year for me.
Hmm.
I had moved down to help out with a church plant,
Hmm.
and I wasn't on staff or anything like that. I worked at Starbucks, and I knew the pastor. He was like, "Hey, why don't you just come down and help out? You can, kind of help out with music
Yeah.
and the student ministry." And so I, volunteered a lot of my time with them. But being a very relatively new church plant, it was mostly young families,
Hmm.
and so there weren't hardly any people in my age. I didn't have a
Yeah.
lot of friends
Hmm.
in the area at the time. My roommate was a guy I went to college with, and we would hang out. But eventually, he made a bunch of other friends, and
Hmm.
I wasn't really friends with that same group. And so, yeah, I got pretty lonely there for 2010. I was, yeah, pretty lonely for a lot of that year.
Hmm.
And music, I mean, has always been
Yeah.
something that I look to and you know just listened to tons of music in tough times and good times. But so this was one of those albums that I think just kind of really spoke to me in a time where, I was experiencing a lot of loneliness and
Yeah.
wanting to kind of break out of that. And
Yeah, I think it is interesting how those stages in life, there's certain albums that you look back on and you kind of it's hard not to think about them in that context. Like I can
mm,
think of albums where like I have this stretch where I'm not married and I lived overseas for a couple of years and I came back and I was kind of this nomad where like I didn't quite know my place. I didn't feel like I fit in at the church I was going to, which is a kind of a theme of my life. And I
mm,
kind of didn't have this friend, I was kind of trying to hang out with some people and the albums that I was into at those times, there's one that I did a show about recently that like it it spoke to me so much and it was I was so bummed that nobody else got it. Like I was like show it to people that I was trying to be friends with and they just didn't get it. And a couple years later I would kind of re-find a group that was more at least more accepting of my weirdness, and so like that is interesting to think back at those times and just kind of have this like, oh, this is why this means so much to me because of
mhm.
what it did. And yeah, it's great to have those bands that kind of can speak into your life during those times. So
Yeah, it's like an old friend.
yeah, exactly.
How much does it take for us to be loved, for us to be safe? We all are birds, stuck inside our cage, covered up with grace, and behind our safes we hide our face. All the numbers count, yeah, they're tallying in. We can't help but to compare ourselves again.
What are some of your favorite? And we've already talked about some of the songs, but what are some of your favorite tracks from this album?
Oh man, I mean,
It's
I
hard not to
could
say all of them. I think.
right. I really could probably say every song, but I mean, "The Things You Were" is a perfect opener.
Hmm.
Where it just kicks in with the drums and that bass line is just so good, and
Yeah.
the chorus is just hits so good. And then "Excuses," which
Yeah.
was, like I said, the lead single, and "Cages and Birds." I love
Yeah.
those ones, and um, "The Great Physician" though is probably my favorite on the
Nice.
whole album. Yeah, that song's always just really spoken to me, especially like I said, during times of just not having the best time in life.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's just it's just a solid album
Yeah.
front to back.
Yeah. I do think the growing pains. The first moment that really grabbed me is on Growing Pains, which is the second
Mm.
song.
Hmm.
It's the breakdown that's a kind of at about the 3 minute mark. Something about that breakdown that really kind of I don't know, some of the music really starts to kind of open up, it almost feels like. And that was the first moment that grabbed me. But then you mentioned Excuses, which is interesting that it's the lead single because that when the chorus hits on that album or on that song, that's where I really feel like there's a life that just kind of gets breathed into this. The first two
Mm.
songs are good, but
Hmm.
that really it's funny. I did not realize that was the lead single,
Yeah,
and that
they've
is
got
the
a music
chorus
video
that I'm
for
like,
it too.
wow. So yeah,
Yeah, at least they had it. I don't know if I'll have to look it up after we're done here, but yeah, they had a music video for it too. And actually, that music video was part of some music video contest that I'm pretty sure was
hmm,
on. I don't know if it had to have been either like MTV or VH1, but it was
yeah,
just on like a website. It wasn't on because
hmm,
obviously they weren't neither one of those was actually showing music videos anymore by that point. But
right,
yeah, they had this competition because I remember even Deus Vale was talking about on their social media, like, "Hey, can you guys go vote for us?"
yeah,
And so, yeah, lots of people were getting to hear that song, and there are some other good bands in that competition as well. There's this really cool band called Cody and Velvet Club that
hmm.
nobody has ever heard of. Have you ever heard of the Fratellis?
I haven't.
Oh man, great Scottish pub rock band.
Okay,
I would not be surprised if you would know at least a couple of their songs that you've heard just in the background of other things.
sure.
They've had songs used in all kinds of stuff, but
Hmm.
the lead singer of that band started this other band that's very like 1950s, 1960s, almost kind of like old school big band jazz kind of a thing. It's really
Sure.
cool with this female vocalist as well. Anyway, they
Yeah.
only did one album, then they were done. But yeah, I just remember that competition. That's how I found out that band. I'm like, oh, this is so cool. Deus Vale's involved in this, and
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they didn't end up winning, but it was just cool to see them get that attention. I almost wonder if that might be part of why the album had that early digital release.
Yeah, maybe.
For opportunities like that, maybe they were getting with A&R from Mono versus Stereo was putting in work, I guess, maybe.
Yeah.
So who knows? But
Yeah. It's a great choice for a single for
yeah,
first single because the chorus really is great. And then I really like obviously the album is named Birds in Cages, and I
Mhm.
really do like the thematic elements of those two songs. They kind of are right in the middle of the album, and it feels like, again, I talked about the idea of it being a cohesive work. It really feels like the album hinges on those. Like there's this really nice dynamic that goes, because I think my two favorite songs are Birds and the Leaper.
Oh yeah,
And Birds is really I think it's a great pop song. Obviously, that's the one that Matt Thiessen is on, but I really like how you get through Cages, and this is where I think some of those themes too about like faith and freedom come. But the chorus for Birds is another one that just really, it's a really, really great pop song in my opinion. And it does seem to be, I love that it's track 5, that like the thematic center of this album is right in the center. It's kind of a cool thing that I think they did, and I feels intentional. I could be way off. Maybe it's just that's where they wanted to go, but it feels intentional that that's kind of the middle of the album in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you.
And then I think Sunlight is another one where I really like his vocal delivery, the way he delivers the line. It's in the chorus. He says, "Touches us," and then he we are comfortable with this. Those are kind of two lines that he really delivers, and it's different than a lot of his other vocal delivery. So it really pops, in my opinion. So I think Sunlight's another one that, although again, that's one of the ones I mentioned. The guitar at the beginning throws me off because it feels a little like I'm always like, oh, this isn't as pretty. It's fine, but it just does. It's everything else is so pretty that it's like, oh, where'd this come from? But then that I really, really enjoy the vocal delivery on that. So that's another one that I really think is enjoyable.
Yeah, the vocal cadence of those verses is so interesting.
Yes, yeah, he does something special on it, in my opinion. So, and then I'm with you. I think The Great Physician, it's overtly Christian, so you know it's not going to be for everybody if you're not into that. But I think it's a really good. I was reading through the lyrics before we started, and I think it's just great. Like I like the chorus a lot. You know. So follow and hope will be there if you'll listen. Take your place under the hands of the great physician. The great physician. Like I love that. Again, it's very poetic, but it's really good. And obviously, the great physician is a Christian reference that goes back, long before them. But it's a really good callback, and I think it's some very touching lyrics, very poetic, but it's a really well done song. I agree.
Even the music. Yeah, musically, what's going on while he's singing that line, with the piano and the guitar kind of like weaving in and out of each other, and that melody is so cool and just so well done and thought out.
Yeah, I agree. My one thing I'll pick on is I love a good closing track. That's that's what I want on every album, and I think Atlantis is fine. It's fine as a closer, but like I mentioned earlier, I think The Leaper is maybe my other favorite song of this. So the fact that it's the penultimate song and doesn't close the album, like it does throw me off because I really like The Leaper. I think is probably my favorite song on the album. So I just wish those were flipped, and maybe it wouldn't work.
I can see that,
but I totally wish it ends with The Leaper because I think that's my favorite song off the album.
Yeah.
So
I think that would work. If you were to do an alternate track listing, those are the only two you'd flip.
That's the only two I'd flip. I think the rest of it's perfect.
Yeah. I think that would still work, honestly.
Yeah. And that's another one that I think the lyrical content is really, really good. And I think what he's talking about, so I'm going to read something here. So he says, "So I'll leap from the edge knowing nothing of the fall." That is really, really great, in my opinion. How much time do we have before the end? As the world rushes in, I'm compelled to look back home. I'm finally conscious of how this began. The beginning of a lifetime in the chains of the leaper's end. Again, fairly poetic, but I love that idea of like, so I'll leap from the edge knowing nothing of the fall. Like that's life, right? Like there are times where I'm a super anxious dude. Anxiety is a struggle for me. And like, should I do this or should I do that? And my dad has to always tell me like, Caleb, you can't predict the future. Knowing what you know right now, that's a good decision. You just you can't play this game of what's going to happen. And like you talked about God's sovereignty, like you got to trust that God will provide and he will make the way. And like, so I think it's a really great album or really great song. And I really like the lyrics and I just felt like it was really poetic. So it's a real good lyrical content in that song, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed.
There you go. That's my deep dive into lyrics from an album that I'm fairly new to, but I like good lyrical content, so I was trying to read up on some of them.
One thing specifically, where is it? Which song is it? Oh, Cages.
Okay.
So did you notice that first line? I can't stand the mechanical breath. Did you notice it's almost like someone, I don't know if someone was using like a vocoder or something like that, but it almost like, go back and listen to it again. It's almost like this robotic voice. Cool. I don't know if or maybe they put an effect on Wes's voice and like doubled it.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you go back and listen to it with, really crank it up in your headphones, you'll hear it. I'm like, oh, that's such a cool, almost not a tangible way, but like matching the lyrics with what they're doing vocally.
Yeah.
And I don't know, just a really cool choice to make there. I don't know. I thought it was awesome.
That feels like a Mark Lee Townsend.
Yeah.
Let's try this. I mean, good producer, right? Just let's give this a shot. You don't have to go with it, and then kind of So maybe it wasn't his idea, but it feels like something that could be. So.
Without reservations.
Years later, again, this was new to me, but why should somebody go back and check this album out?
I'd say especially if somebody was a fan of those bands, mentioned earlier, Copeland. Who did I say? Copeland, Jack's Mannequin, something corporate, that very piano driven, kind of emo-y pop. I think if you've never heard this and you're into that kind of music, I can't imagine someone not enjoying this. It's that style, but I feel like they did, especially on this album, they just did it a lot better than a lot of other bands out there. I'm not saying necessarily something corporate or whoever, but I think they just put out one of those. I think they just put out, one of the strongest albums of that style.
Yeah.
And, I do think it's held up very well.
Yeah, and as somebody who's like new to this emo pop thing, like I think Steven was on a show a while ago. We were talking about something totally different, and I was like, he joined me from when we talked about Copeland, and I was like, Dashboard Confessionals never really did anything for me. He's like, you're killing me, and I'm like, sorry, it's just missed it. I missed the scene, but my affection for bands like Copeland, Deus Vale, and May. I'd also throw May, and I know they're a little more. Sure. A little less pop and a little more rock, probably, but my affection for those bands really is growing. It may not be something that I'm going to be like real like on all the time, but now this is the second album here in the last couple months where I throw these things out on Twitter and people respond, and so it's like, well, clearly this somebody has a fondness for this. This has touched somebody. I want to examine it, and so like. The Copeland record we talked about, me and Steven did, that it really grew on me. I think a lot of these, the first listen, it's kind of this, like, it takes me a little bit, but once it gets going, like, I was listening. I started listening to this to enjoy it, not just to get ready for the show. And it took a couple listens. I think that's part of being so new to it. but it really, my fondness for bands like that really is growing. And this was another one that I'm excited to have talked about it because it did force me to take that deeper look into it. And I don't know if I'm going to turn into an emo kid at the age of 45. I have my own emo kids to deal with upstairs. No, they're not. None of my kids are emo actually at all. Not even close. But it was really, I really am excited that I've gotten to kind of dive into these albums because I think it's worth, if you give it a listen and you're like, not for me, I'd say sit with it a little bit. There's the same thing with the Copeland one. The first listen, I was like, ooh, this is going to be tough. I'm not going to have a lot to say.
I was going to say, you jumped in. Oh, man, what was Ixora's their fifth album?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot to dive right into.
Exactly.
Without the build up to it.
Yeah.
So,
but all of them have paid off. Like they have.
Nice.
And I think that's what makes this going back and worth checking out. Like you're going to find something I think enjoyable here. You're going to find some really beautiful music. And especially if you are still a person of faith, like there's some really good faith driven music here that I think is cool. There's some cool lyrical content. So I can attest this is worth checking out. If you've never checked it out 15 years later, it's worth going back and checking it out.
Just to live with such shame. It's all in my head so full, and hope will be there if you listen. And take your place, bound in our hands of the great procession.
Okay, I think that's a pretty good breakdown of Birds and Cages by Deus Vale. Again, released January 26, 2010 and October 27th, 2009. So celebrating a 15-year anniversary of its physical release. John, where can people find you online? I know you're hanging on Twitter. I know the masses seem to have moved off of Twitter a little bit, but I know you're on there for sure. So where can people find you online?
Yeah, on Twitter at Music Fanatic PH, not F Fanatic, because I'm a Philly sports guy.
Nice. Okay.
And
Pennsylvania.
Yes, exactly. Except for hockey, my dad's a big Flyers fan, but my brother and I never really followed him with the hockey.
See, I'm a Minnesota guy.
Oh,
but we never got into the professional team.
Okay.
My dad he went to the University of Minnesota, so
Okay.
Gophers hockey was what I was raised on.
All right.
I love the Phillies jerseys, by the way. I think they are
Yes.
some of the most underrated jerseys, especially when they do the cream with the blue hat. So
Yeah.
nice. Anyway, sorry.
All good. I'll take it. Most people are not so kind towards Philly sports teams, so hey, I'll take it. So yeah, Music Fanatic on Twitter, John Mark 4184 on Instagram.
Okay.
That's about all I got for socials. I'm not gonna get into too much else. Most of my Instagram posts are just like vinyl. Sometimes my family, but I don't know anymore. I'm like, I don't know how much I want to really have my kids' faces on the internet, but
yeah, it's a weird dynamic. It happens for me. They end up there occasionally, but I do at moments I feel like, should I? And I know, especially as they've grown into being teenagers, there's a little bit of like, oh, you put that on the internet? And it's like, yeah, I did. Although now I have a podcast that they come up, especially between this one and the youth group one, they come up a fair amount because we're talking about youth group stuff, and 3 of my kids are in youth group. Next year, 4 of my kids will be in youth group. So we do a lot of compare and contrast to what we're seeing in our kids' lives. So they get talked about a fair amount on the podcast. So sorry, kids.
Right.
Not that they're listening to this. So.
Yeah.
They don't care about the music one at all. So awesome. Well, thanks so much, John, for staying up late and talking about this album with me. Thanks for saying yes to do this. It forced me to listen to it, so I really do appreciate that. And I probably wouldn't have taken as deep a dive. And so thanks so much for joining me, and it was great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was a ton of fun.
Awesome.
How much time do we have before the end? As the world rushes in, I'm compelled to look back home.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Album Anniversary Podcast. I want to say thanks to John again for joining me. It's great to have him on to talk about this album and dive into it. Again, like I said, this is an album I was not familiar with, so I was super excited when he said he was interested in doing it. It pushed me to dig deeper, and I'm glad I did. It was a great album to review and to take a deeper dive in. So thanks, John, for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. Go check out his the band that he was involved with, Attalus. They got some great stuff out there. Again, it was something I was introduced to late, but totally worth checking out. Go check out some of their music as well. Worth a listen, that's for sure. Let us know what you thought. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? What are your favorites from this album? You can find me on Twitter at Caleb the Spy. No spaces in that. I'm also on Instagram at Caleb the Spy. There's underscores in between those names. I'm also on Blue Sky. I probably should add that to the script. I'm there now. I'm not doing a whole lot, but I am there. You can find the chickadee over there as well. You can email the show at KalebTheSpyPodcast@gmail.com. No spaces or underscores in that, and there is an S at the end of that. Again, KalebTheSpyPodcast@gmail.com. And, to be honest, if you want to be on the show, the easiest way to do it is probably follow me on Twitter or email me at that show. I have a spreadsheet that's got all the shows I'm planning for this year. If you're interested in checking them out, I do have a lot of guests filled up. I think almost every show has got a guest, but I'm looking to do some double ups. I have, two people on to talk about an album here and there just to add to the dynamic of the show. We'll see how that works. So if there's, if you're interested in being on the show, let me know. I do have a plan for all of 2025. You can also follow me on Twitter. Occasionally I'll just throw it out there that, hey, I still haven't found a guest for this album, or I'm looking to add somebody. I will just throw it out there and add guests that way as well. So that's probably the easiest way if you're interested in being on the show. Please subscribe and share the podcast. Please leave a rating or review. I have heard it is an effective way to spread the word about podcasts. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do with my friend Scott. It's called I Survived Youth Group in the 90s, and it's not just a podcast where we reminisce about our youth and our youth group experience. We're trying to go back and interview fellow 90s youth group kids and 2000s youth group kids, and we want to hear your story. We want to hear how that youth group experience has impacted your lives. Again, whether you've left the faith entirely or you're at the church you were raised at, we just want to know how that youth group experience has impacted your life and hear your story. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Sing It Out at Street Level by Peg and the Rejected. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon. Cool. All right, well, let's go into our next song then. Or next song. Cheapers, I say that all the time. Let me start over. Awesome. Any other things want to call out on what you like about the album? We'll talk songs later, so.
Yeah. Overall, I don't think so, I guess.
Okay. Cool. Well, we'll keep on moving, Tara said. And I know some of these questions bleed into each other a little bit.
Sure.
I'm not a good podcast host. So.
Not true.
No, it's for fun, and I'm glad to be doing it. It's fun to talk about music with people.